Andy Benkert and Alice Kaufman will be talking about Measure B and Measure C. Andy will be pro Measure B, con on Measure C. Alice, con on Measure B, pro on Measure C. And I'm sure I'm going to mix this up. So that's why I wrote it down here. So what we'll do is we'll first talk about Measure B and then Measure C. We'll have questions, and in fact, we've got, thank you very much, Pete Kolstad and the Neighborhood Commission folks. If anyone has questions, we'll do them in written form so we maximize our time. So if someone can pass these out, just raise your hand to get a card or a pencil. And so what we'll do is it'll be 2 minutes for pro side, 2 minutes for con side, 1 minute rebuttal for the con side, and then 1 minute for the pro, and then we'll have questions. And we'll do that for Measure B, and we'll do it for Measure C, and into about 9:55. And then at that point, we'll go into the neighborhood caucus meeting. So with that, you can see on the overhead here, Measure B is an initiative to amend the Envision San Jose 2040 General Plan, the San Jose Municipal Code, and the Evergreen East Hills Development Policy to add a senior housing development project is on the ballot for San Jose voters in Santa Clara County, California on June 5th, 2018. Yes vote is a vote in favor of amending the Envision San Jose 2040 General Plan to rezone employment lands in the city for senior housing, including a senior housing overlay in the Evergreen Campus Industrial Area, allowing for up to 910 residential units. A no vote is against amending the Envision 2040 General Plan and rezoning employment lands for senior housing, and this is from Ballotpedia. So with that, Andy, if you want to start off.
Yes, thank you for inviting me to present today about Measure B. As I'm sure you're all aware, we are in the throes of an unprecedented housing crisis. News articles and stories run every day telling us about skyrocketing prices, historic low levels of homes in the market, and the effects this crisis is having on people and businesses. Our local leaders have not kept up with the need for housing, especially affordable housing. Recent reports have found that the City Council has approved only 20% of the affordable housing required over the past 5 to 6 years, primarily due to waiving affordable housing requirements from a majority of the projects going up in the downtown area. Additionally, the housing needs of more than 50% of San Jose's senior population have not been met. A recent report presented to the City Council finds that the city's goal of creating 25,000 housing units over the next few years, including 10,000 affordable units, is unlikely to be met due to a variety of economic factors. So how are we going to get out of this housing crisis if it's unlikely market forces will allow builders to create the housing we need? Well, we have a chance to do something about that by passing Measure B. Measure B asks voters to approve a zoning change on 200 acres of vacant industrial land in Evergreen to residential. This will allow us to build over 900 housing units for active seniors, 55 and over. 20% of the units will be designated affordable and offered at below market rates to seniors, with a preference given to military veterans. This project will protect 30 acres of the property as permanently protected open space. Water conservation and solar energy are built into the project to lessen impacts on our environment, and it will generate millions of dollars annually for local government, parks, libraries, and school districts without raising taxes. It will also generate far less traffic than currently allowed industrial usage.
Thank you, Andy. Alice.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alice Kaufman, and I'm...
Can't hear you.
Can you hear me better now?
You probably should start it. Well, why don't we start at the time here? So, yeah.
So, my name is Alice Kaufman. I'm the Legislative Advocacy Director with the Committee for Green Foothills, which is an environmental group working here in Santa Clara County and San Mateo counties. So the reason that we're opposed, the reason that all local environmental groups, as well as all of San Jose City Council, as well as most of the state elected leaders in the region and county elected leaders, the League of Women Voters, the AARP is opposed, housing organizations such as SV at Home and Home First are opposed to Measure B, Spur is opposed, the Mercury News is opposed. This is an unprecedented coalition of people who hardly ever agree on anything. The Democratic Party and the County Democratic Party and the County Republican Party are both opposed. And the reason for that is because, yes, we have a housing crisis. This doesn't address that. This is building the wrong kind of housing. It's sprawl housing. It's out on the farthest edge of the city. It's not near transit. The AARP has sent out an email saying this is not where senior housing should be built. Senior housing should be built in places where there are walkable communities so that seniors can get out and walk to the store instead of having to drive everywhere. It should be built in infill locations. It's bad environmentally because sprawl not only impacts our hillsides, but also puts more traffic on the roads. And it adds to the commute. It's not just more traffic, which is bad for air pollution, but it's traffic traveling in the same direction as most of the current traffic does. So it increases congestion. You've heard the statements that it would add 20% of affordable housing. Because Measure B rewrites the entire general plan to change the rules for senior housing developments of this sort, it would actually weaken the existing affordable housing laws. It would provide less housing for the lowest income people than is currently required. And I'd just like you to ask yourselves this. If the goals of the proponents of Measure B were to provide more housing, more affordable housing, why can't they follow the general plan as it is and build the housing? We have many, many sites in the city that are zoned for housing, infill housing. Why do they have to come to the voters to ask you to change the general plan?
So now it's one more, oh.
We're doing 1 minute rebuttal.
Okay, yeah, we'll do it that way. Yeah,
Okay, that's fine. So the notion that one measure is going to rewrite the entire general plan is just false. This is providing affordable housing to the community, more so than what many of the projects that are being built downtown right now have provided. In fact, many of the downtown projects were exempted from any kind of affordable housing requirements because the city council decided to let that pass. We're going to provide 100% more affordable units than those. 180 much needed affordable housing units in our community for struggling seniors and military veterans. So we think this is the right kind of housing in the right place. Putting high-rise industrial buildings directly across the street from these neighborhoods is going to negatively impact them, traffic, and quality of life. So please, I do implore you to support Measure B. We need housing.
I guess my response to that is that because there's an exemption for downtown housing doesn't mean that we should do another exemption for housing that's out on the edges of the city. The affordable housing needs that we have in our community are severe, and we need to address those for sure. What we don't want is this measure, which will rewrite the affordable housing laws, not just for the current parcel that they're proposing out in Evergreen, 200 parcels, but for any future senior housing overlay project that happens underneath this measure. One thing that hasn't been mentioned by the Measure B proponents is, as the Mercury News stated, as the Ballot argument stated, this does rewrite the entire general plan. This does affect the entire city. It makes it possible for any employment lands in the city that are considered underutilized, which is not defined in the measure, so we don't really know what that means. But it could potentially mean any industrial or commercial lands that aren't built out to their maximum capacity, whether that could mean the strip mall on the corner, whether it could mean a local office building. We don't know what it means, so you shouldn't vote for a measure if you don't know what it means.
Okay, so as you can tell, I've been randomly putting these questions together here, and I have no idea what's going to come up first.
So we've got 6 minutes.
6 minutes for questions, okay. So you'll each have a minute to respond to this. If Measure B is so great for affordable housing, why are all of the affordable housing and homeless advocacy groups opposed? More are listed on your website, I think it says. So who wants to go first on that question?
I'll take that. They're opposed to it because the mayor called them up and twisted their arm. We're not doing things by their rules. In fact, we are pointing out the inadequacies of the council and the mayor over the past 5 to 6 years in terms of not producing the affordable housing that our community needs. So when the mayor calls up and twists your arm, more often than not, these groups are going to fall in line because they know they need to work with the mayor later on down the road and he might not be as willing to if they were to go ahead and support us.
So it was 1 minute. You want to do 1 minute per response?
Can I weigh
Yeah.
in as well?
Okay.
Andy, I'm sorry, that's ridiculous.
Okay.
The city council, if you follow city council politics, it's pretty evenly split. You know, the mayor and the pro-business side tend to be on one side, and the people who are more, you know, in favor of the unions, in favor of the tenants' rights organizations and so on, tend to be on the other side. And so the affordable housing organizations really never expect the mayor to support them. The mayor doesn't have the power to twist their arm because they have a good coalition on the council that supports them. Sometimes they win, sometimes they lose. It is pretty evenly split. But in this case, the mayor and all of the council members, including the ones who usually line up against the mayor on things like affordable housing issues and tenants' rights, they're all opposed. And nobody twisted these groups' arms. They considered it very carefully. They spoke to us. They spoke to the other side. Their boards voted. They took a deliberate decision, and this is where they came out.
So since Andy answered the first on that one, Alice can answer first on this one. I'm not certain that this is a question, but you can come up with the question based on it. The general plan is for business/commercial. We need jobs. So that was the question. So I don't know if either of you want to address that or...
Or we could pick another question.
Okay, we can just go to the next one then. Here's one. What about vets? Veterans.
Sure. The Measure B component states that this is going to provide housing for seniors and veterans. By law, they're not allowed to guarantee any housing to veterans. So the idea that this is stated that it's definitely for veterans is there can't be a guarantee. That's under the law. It's all they're allowed to do is a preference for veterans.
Yes, that is correct. We are doing a preference for veterans because we don't want to go to court immediately if we say we're setting aside X number of units for veterans. That's a waste of time and resources to fight that kind of a fight. Other projects in California have used preference for veterans. We are building into this project space for services to be provided to veterans on site and staff to provide services to veterans on site. Why would we do that if we're not going to house veterans? I'm a veteran myself. I talked to these people before I decided to work for them, and I felt confident that they're doing what they feel is the right thing to try to honor veteran service. And I wouldn't be doing this project if I felt that I was just being trotted out here as window dressing.
Steve, how are we doing for time? Do we have time for another question? Or?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. According to the Mercury News, the affordable housing requirement is weakened to such an extent that it may never be implemented. I don't see the question there. Are you being paid to speak today, and who is paying? That's a question.
Yes,
No.
Ponderosa Homes, the developer.
No, I'm volunteering my time.
I question that because I think her work with the Committee for Green Foothills is an in-kind contribution that will most likely show up on
When I work during business hours, as an in-kind contribution, I'm here on a Saturday morning. I'm volunteering my time.
I'm here on a Saturday morning as well. Whenever I'm talking about this issue, I'm working, and I think that is similar to Alice as well.
So there's a question here that's on Measure C. I'll set that aside for the next topic. Where's the parcel location, specific streets, flatland, or hills?
I'm sorry, can you-
Oh, where's the specific location? Is it flatland or hills?
I have no idea where you're talking about.
The Evergreen parcel is out at the end of Aborn Road, sort of in between Aborn and Yerba Buena, is that it?
Aborn.
Yeah, it's on the eastern edge in
Up in
District
the
8.
hills or down in the flatland?
Yeah, I don't know
It's
that
right
area.
Yeah, it's right on the edge of the hills. It's right where the hills start to go.
So it's not the flatland on Center Street.
No,
No.
but it's not the hills as defined by the city, from what I understand.
What
This
means
is-
land is not physically flat.
It's not physically flat.
Okay,
It is
that's-
gently rolling, and it is within the city's green line. In fact, the city's green line forms the eastern boundary of the property. Yerba Buena Road forms a good portion of the western boundary.
It's all open space right there.
It actually is not open space, it's vacant. Open space is a separate
There's
designation.
no,
It's a separate designation.
So there's no development on there right now. It's okay. So let's get to the last question before we go to Measure C. The argument against the measure is credible. Why hasn't that message been publicized?
Because we don't have the money. Because we are mostly volunteers, and as Andy said, I work for an environmental organization. I really don't get paid very much, and I have all my usual work to do. So none of the people who are working on this measure are really able to, put a huge amount of time into it or effort. And we're mostly a coalition of volunteers. We managed to scrape together some money, hopefully to put together a mailer, because those are expensive. We've got some yard signs. We hope some of you who agree with us on this will take some yard signs and put them in the yards. But I know they're sending out mailers every day now. They're putting TV ads on. We can't afford that. We can't afford that. That's one of the reasons why I personally am so upset. I see this as billionaires buying what they want because they couldn't get it through the general plan. And they couldn't get it by going to the city council. They couldn't get permission to put residential sprawl out there. So they're trying to fool the voters into doing it by sending out these glossy mailers and blanketing the air.
Okay, it's time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's done a good job explaining it. Thanks.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we have time for another question before we switch.
Well, the next question was on it really was a Measure C question. Sorry. Which I just can't seem to hold. It does say Measure C on here, so I think we will get into Measure C then.
Okay.
Of course, there's waters. I have to thank my son for bringing him over. He is a wonderful person, and I love him dearly. Here we go, Measure C.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, well, now we're going to talk about Measure C. So this is our short break. You guys get some water and everything.
Yeah, we have 1 minute. The answers were short, so we have a minute in here.
So Measure C is a charter amendment to limit development of non-employment use on specified employment lands is on the ballot for San Jose voters in Santa Clara County, California on June 5th, 2018. A yes vote is in favor of amending the city charter to restrict development not of employment use in lands zoned as employment lands within the city. A no vote is a vote against amending the city charter to restrict development not of employment use in lands zoned as employment lands within the city. And the source, again, is Ballotpedia. So in this case, we will start with Alice, and when Steve is, we have 2 minutes.
All right. So Measure C acts to limit residential sprawl. So it was brought forward in response to Measure B going on the ballot because Measure B enables residential sprawl. So Measure C would limit it. So what it does is before any employment lands that are within 1 mile of the Green Line, which is the farthest edge of the city, can be converted to residential sprawl, that kind of proposal will have to undergo a physical study to evaluate the financial impacts to the city, the impacts on the city's jobs, housing ratio, to make sure that the city, the city coffers and the taxpayers aren't going to be negatively financially impacted. It also requires any residential development, and that would include the evergreen development that Measure B puts in place. It would require them to have 50% of their units be affordable. So right now they've got 20%. This would require that they have to be 50% affordable. So in terms of if you want to do something for affordable housing, you should vote for Measure C because this will really increase the amount of affordable housing that gets provided. It also has requirements in there for certain environmental benefits such as energy efficiency design, using recycled water in the landscaping and so on. And it also requires that certain services be provided for example, elderly or disabled residents, shuttle service to nearby transit centers or medical facilities, meal delivery, that sort of thing. And I should also say that this applies to the sort of the southern and eastern edges of the city. So for example, in Coyote Valley, which environmental groups are very concerned about, we're worried that Coyote Valley could be completely covered with residential sprawl. This would apply there. It would apply to the evergreen parcel. It would apply to these areas out there.
Measure C was a backroom deal that was done at the last minute. The council talked about it vaguely at 2 meetings, and then the mayor brought forth the text of Measure C and gave it to council members a few days before they were to vote on it, which basically effectively limited the overall debate about this. And from what I understand, there was little to no public input on this. And the main goal of it is to take people's vote away from Measure B. Its stated primary goal is to negate B if voters pass it. And I find a problem with that. I don't think that's the way that we should run our government. The city supposedly has regulations about not introducing competing ballot measures. Somehow they were able to get around that for this. And I think it's intentionally confusing because I have talked to many people that have no idea what happens if one passes or the other doesn't, or both pass. So this kind of intentional confusing the voters is part of the problem that we see time and time again with ballot measures. They couldn't just try to make their case against B on its own merits. They had to introduce a competing ballot measure to try to confuse the issue. So hopefully they can get their way and preserve their reputation as opposed to us pointing out the fact that they haven't been doing their jobs in the last 5 to 6 years. So thank you.
So do you know how much public input there was before the language of Measure B was finalized? None. But that's the way ballot measures are done. It was a privately initiated ballot measure. They wrote it up. They submitted it to the city to be able to have their petition to collect signatures. But the language was finalized. There was no public input. There were no meetings. In Measure C, because it was initiated by the council, there were public meetings. They had to do it quickly because the deadline was approaching. They only had a few days in order to get it on the ballot, but there were public meetings. Ponderosa Homes came and spoke. I spoke. Lots of other people spoke. There was public input, and there were some responses to that public input. In response to this thing that this is a backroom deal, this was all done in public, so you should know that. So, and if both of the measures pass, then Measure C controls. And the reason that it was put on the ballot that way is because of all the money that the Measure B proponents have and how we knew that we weren't going to have the money to combat that. So
I'm not sure how much of a public process you can have on a measure that the city is putting forward when the council itself gets the language of that just a few days before they're supposed to vote on it. There may have been discussion of a vague idea at prior council meetings, but again, that measure text was given to the council just a few days before they were to vote on it. So I don't think that's really the kind of public input that we would like to see. A measure that's sponsored by our city that is going to amend the charter for the city of San Jose. I don't think that's the kind of public input and public openness that we want to see in our city government.
Okay, so I think we're ready for questions then, right?
Yep.
Brown Act requires council agenda items to be noticed. Did the anti-C people add resolution the council? Address the council, sorry. So did the anti-C people address the council, is the question.
I believe so. I believe we had somebody there. I don't remember.
yes,
specifically.
yes, I was there.
I watched the video.
Okay.
Your attorneys
Okay.
were there.
Okay, so we'll go on to the next question. Was there more public debate on Measure B or Measure C?
Measure C, because there's no public debate on Measure B.
Public debate, meaning community meetings like this, I'd say there's been far more public discussion on Measure B than probably a lot of other development projects that happen in the city. We've talked to many people on the phone, at public meetings like this, so I think there's been a significant amount of public debate about Measure B.
Okay.
To the extent that by public debate you mean debate that then is taken into account and potentially changing the measure, the answer to that is zero. This measure was written, finalized form, can't be changed. It all happened before it ever went to the public. Again, that's how ballot measures are done.
So why wasn't Measure C written so people could understand it? It's very confusing wording. So I don't know who wants to start with that.
That's a great question. I think it was done that way to intentionally obfuscate the issue and the issues surrounding Measure B.
I don't know why anybody would deliberately make something confusing if they were trying to get people to vote for it. It was written the way it was in order to specifically combat Measure B. Measure B is already confusing. A lot of, it takes lawyers to understand. It's 367 pages long. So I'm a lawyer, and I had to go to a more experienced land use lawyer to explain to me exactly what Measure B could potentially do. And when I read Measure C is about 7 pages long. When I read it, I immediately understood what it would do. So, can I also actually respond? You said before that you don't know how the city somehow managed to get this on the ballot. Well, Ponderosa Homes sued the city trying to keep this off the ballot. So, and they lost. So, that kind of answers that question, is that the Measure C has already gone through a legal review, and it's appropriate to go on the ballot.
Your mailer ad says that if Measure C passes, it will cost the taxpayers millions. Well, if you don't sue, what are the costs, I guess is the question. What are the costs if Measure C? And I assume they're talking to your side, Andy. I assume the mailer is for the pro measures, it must be the con Measure C. So,
So I'm not quite clear on what the question is.
Okay, I think the question is, the mailer apparently says Measure C, if Measure C passes, it'll cost the taxpayer millions. So then that's the premise of the ad mailer. And then the question is, so what are the costs? What are those millions? What's it going to be from?
We have heard from various people, attorneys and other developers, that there are aspects of Measure C that seem vague enough and that could apply to other areas. And it is likely that some people may take the city to court over Measure C to challenge some of the assumptions that they see within the language of the text.
Well, once again, Ponderosa Homes has already sued the city over Measure C. And I'm sure if anybody's going to sue over it, once it passes, they'll be first in line. Andy and I were presenting in a community meeting the other night where one of the residents said, by saying this, isn't Ponderosa Homes threatening me as a taxpayer by saying, if you vote for Measure C, I'm going to sue the city, and that's going to cost you millions in taxes. That was what one of the residents said. So I don't really understand this business of saying, if you pass Measure C, it's going to cost the city millions, when if they don't sue, then that won't happen.
That's no threat. It's reality. It's the litigious society that we live in. I've heard also from opponents that if Measure B passes, that will be sued. So I think the reality is yes, we are a litigious society. And something that gets passed that we don't like, our first thought is potentially legal action. So I think to say that we're just going to sue is maybe a statement of fact for the kind of society that we live in.
Time is up.
Okay, so I think you guys supposed to address that. This next one wins the award for penmanship. The bottom line is that the premise is the bottom line is that the city of San Jose is business deficient and therefore does not have the tax base it needs for services it needs. So the question is, if we continue to allow our employment land to be turned into residential, how will continued urban sprawl be the answer to our budget issues? So I think, Andy, you go first on this one.
I'm sure. The city itself converts employment lands over to residential and other uses all the time. The location of this particular piece of property doesn't lend itself all that well to industrial use. Again, putting an industrial campus of high-rise buildings directly across the street from single-family neighborhood homes doesn't seem like a great use of that particular piece of property. So yes, we do have a jobs imbalance in the city. Yes, we do need to find ways to bring in more jobs, but the city itself converts employment plans on a regular basis when it suits their fancy.
Yeah, we do have a jobs housing imbalance in San Jose. And this is something that's plagued San Jose for decades. It's one of the reasons why San Jose doesn't have the kind of money available that cities like Palo Alto do to provide services to their residents. And that is why the San Jose General Plan has as one of its core principles fiscal responsibility and not converting any further employment lands to housing. The reason for this is not just that the loss of jobs, it's not just that you want to have more jobs. It's also that housing, particularly single-family residential neighborhoods, costs a lot more in services, costs more than it brings in. So it's expensive to the city. And they specifically don't want to allow any more of that. That's why the general plan focuses future residential growth in infill areas, because that is less costly to serve. When you sprawl out, it costs the taxpayers more.
Okay, final question, please. What's that? Yep, final question, perfect. Please clarify, a yes vote on C would require 50% of a new development must be affordable. So if you want to start
For
out.
certain developments, yes. That's why Measure C is very limited. I mean, maybe that's why Andy says it's confusing. It doesn't apply all across the city. It applies to certain lands that are next to the urban growth boundary. So if a parcel was in 1 mile of the urban growth boundary and it's being converted from employment to residential, then it has to provide the 50% affordable housing.
Andy?
Yeah, that's what the measure does. Absolutely.
Okay.
Not much more.
All right, a great way to agree on some common ground. So, I want to thank both of you for coming out on a Saturday morning. And of course, thank you everyone for attending this part and for the very nice questions. Thank you. And that puts us exactly at 9:55.